Hi, everyone. I'm Morgan Scalzo. I'm the event manager here at Statsig. Welcome to our learning lab today with Tyler, one of our engineers here at Statsig. We're going to give everyone just a moment or so to log in so we can get started, but might as well go over some housekeeping. This is going to be recorded, so if you want to revisit anything from this presentation, we will send that out tomorrow. So keep an eye out for that. And I do apologize. I am on site at Data Council right now, so there's a lot of active things happening behind me. So I'll make sure to go on mute as soon as I'm done with the intro. Additionally, if you have questions, we're going to go ahead and make sure to leverage that Q&A. This is live, so as Tyler's going through the module and kind of the workflow, if you have questions or would like to revisit something, just pop them in there, and then we'll have time at the end to go through and reiterate on anything that was covered. I think last but not least, if you want to just continue the discussion, we'll make sure to put a link in for our Slack channel. That's going to be a great opportunity for you to continue to ask questions, learn more about kind of the workflow that we're going through. But I think that's it. Tyler, I think I've covered everything. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, excuse me. Hi, everyone. My name is Tyler. I'm an engineer here at Statsig. I've been at Statsig for about a year. I was at Facebook for like 2-3 years before that. So I have some context on using a lot of feature gates and experimentation, and also like a little bit of that ML experience too. And so what this learning lab is going to be about is we're going to talk about how you can either, if you're used to using ML and like haven't done a lot of putting it behind gates or experimenting on it, or if you have done a lot of that stuff and are looking to incorporate ML into your product, we'll sort of go at a pretty high level on both of those and chat about some of the things that Statsig can do to help make it a less sort of scary prospect, and also let you really realize your wins that you're seeing. So first off, in terms of like why ML is something you'd want to even add to your product, we've seen a lot of customers like use it to pretty good top line metric wins. I know we've seen customers when they have like a list of results for like things you might book, they've seen like 30% wins in bookings by like making that ranking better. We've seen other people get like 4% like revenue lifts by just using models to determine, again, like another ranking use case there. It can also lead to like pretty improved user experiences. An example here is captions.ai wrote a post about how they used Statsig to sort of put head-to-head OpenAI's Whisper versus Google's speech-to-text. And so what Captions AI does is you have a recording of yourself and you want to like add captions to it, so it's like snappier, people can follow along, even if they're on mute, things like that. And for that use case, it's kind of hard to like tell off the bat like which one is better. Like you can try out these things yourself. Your employees can dog food it and be like, oh, we think this one's better. Or you can be like, oh, this API call is more expensive, things like that. But unless you're doing some sort of measuring, it's hard to really feel which one is better for your product and your users. So for them, they put it behind an experiment or a feature gate actually. And they ran these two like head to head, and they saw that when they switched to OpenAI's Whisper, they were actually getting like much fewer corrections or word additions to the captions that they were generating. So they were able to like pretty confidently feel that this was actually the right decision. I think they're seeing like 20% less people making corrections, which is pretty big. And even like, I think it was 45% less corrections per transcript, which is like huge, right? That's a much better user experience that you're like delivering to your end users there. And the other cool thing that they were able to notice there, in Statsig, you can do a lot of like slicing by user attributes. So they were actually able to see that for non-American English speakers, like British English or Australian English, the wins were even more significant. And that's like a cool thing to be able to dive into, especially like given that models can kind of have these like weird biases to them that like just as a result of your training data, things like that, where you wouldn't necessarily detect this until you're actually seeing it out in the real world. And finally, the last bit that's really cool about like using ML in your products is it has a lot of room for like continual iterative improvements to your product. as you like add more features, even just as you get more data, it's a way to just like sort of have a well that you can go back to in terms of like eking out those extra wins. And so I tend to think of there being like 3-ish main areas of like problems that you're trying to solve with machine learning. There's this like fancy new one, like generation, that's all the rage now. And one of my colleagues wrote up a really good blog post on this around how you can use Statsig to like do things like prompt engineering and like make that scalable, as well as like measuring that downstream impact onto your product. But we'll probably stick more towards like the more classical ones of prediction or classification. Prediction being, hey, I have this input and I want to know what is my prediction for like the value that like a user will get out of it. Maybe like it's how much money will someone spend if I show them this item, or it's in the case of captions, like what word was said here. And then classification is more just like putting things into buckets. You maybe are doing this already in your product with heuristics for both of those. And I think that's a really good starting point, is like finding those heuristics you have in your product, whether that's what order you're showing some like content in, or just like how you're determining what groups people or items are in. Just sort of replacing those with a more like data-based approach is like a pretty cool way to like snag some neat wins. And I guess the scary part about all of this is that those heuristics are really easy to understand. You know exactly why users are seeing what they're seeing. You also know it's like very, very cheap to have these heuristics. So it can be hard at first to like sort of know, is my model good? You know, like I had my training data, I ran it on it, and I saw the score that I was getting, but like, does the end just is the juice worth the squeeze there? Like, how do you justify to the people at your company that like, oh yes, spending this like extra compute was worth it? Things, or even just like, hey, will this not be a disaster? And that's something that I think Statsig is really powerful at, is like mitigating the risk of taking these like first forays into ML, or to the other point, how you can like justify or explain the wins that you're seeing because of it. And so what Statsig can do is it can help you measure the actual like impact onto your real business metrics when you're out in the real world. So that things like, oh, we noticed that we were able to show that revenue increased when they were in this experience. Things like that is really powerful in justifying that this is like something you should be investing in. Or to the flip side of that, the unfortunate part is sometimes you'll just be like, oh yeah, this was a worse experience, or the users seem to be more confused by it. That's hard to get without trying to measure it. So yeah, putting things behind gates is really helpful, not only for measuring that impact, but also like rolling it out more carefully, more gradually. With the feature gate, you can do something like say, hey, I'm only going to give this to our employees first for like dog fooding, and then I'm going to be ready to start rolling it slowly to my production users. So maybe it's like, hey, we're going to give it to 5% of people and slowly ramp up to like 50%. And then like for a while there, actually like try to measure it with all that statistical power. And it's also just like a good way to have that kill switch. If you need to shut it off for whatever reason, you always have that option without needing like a code push, things like that. And so in terms of what Statsig features are helpful for this, I think there's a few general categories. The first is that I actually think that Statsig's events are like a really powerful source of that training data. They are in a very standardized format. You're probably logging them anyways for your experiments that you might be running, / they would be the things you'd want to measure in an experiment. And we have pretty good integrations with things like Segment, where you can actually forward them from Statsig to your warehouse. So yeah, you're only using the one SDK to log your stuff that you're actually caring about, as well as like capturing this training data, forward it to Segment, like forward it via Segment to like your data warehouse, train your models, and then bring it back and really complete that loop. Like I said, feature gates, they're really powerful. Every time you have a partial rollout, we actually consider that an A/B test. So that's anytime it's not 0 or 100% of users getting an experience. Compare between the two groups and actually give you those stats in terms of how it's affecting every single one of your metrics. In addition to letting you do things like roll it out to employees first. And the last thing that I think is really cool that we've seen a few of our like more cutting edge customers use is exporting exposures. What you can do there is you can look at that feature gate and say, hey, which people were in test and control, i.e. which people were getting my default sort or my like ML based sort. And what we've seen people do there is they'll actually say, okay, for training my model now that like I developed the initial one, I'm actually only going to use training data on people who were getting that default experience as a way to like prevent model drift, like prevent it from biasing itself over and over. So now I'm actually going to hop into the console and sort of walk through those things again that I just mentioned. So this is what Statsig's console looks like. If you log an event, you can go to the events tab and you can actually see all those events. This is just a sample project I set up where I logged some sample things. So if you're like some e-commerce company, maybe you're trying to order your items better, you can do something like every time an item is shown, you log an event for that. So you could say, hey, this was the item, this was the category of it. So I don't know, maybe we're trying to say, oh, for users in these countries, they prefer this category, so we should like prioritize things from that category. And then you can also like log your success event. So maybe at a very low level, that's like something like clicking on that item that we just showed them. So yeah, I'm just using the Statsig SDK to do this. You can see that we actually give you the user properties that you put on it for all of those events. So in this case, it's what country and what they're speaking, as well as what the actual category of the item they clicked on was. And so I think the really cool thing about this is that it's just a very standardized, clean way for you to have your data exist. I know that's like one of the more painful parts a lot of times is you have all these random data sources that you now have to like deal with in order to have that standardized training data. So it's pretty nice to just always be using the same thing there. And like I said, one of the cool things that you can do is you can actually just forward all of those events. And you don't actually have to forward all your events. You can say, hey, just like these ones, I want you to forward along to segment for training purposes. And then everything else is just like, oh, just keep it in Statsig. I'm happy having it just be computed there. So yeah, you can do things like that. And then once you have like taken that data and figured out what features you're going to use and things like that, you've trained your model in whatever stack makes sense for you, whether that's like, I don't know, like TensorFlow, or you've got some gradient like XGBoost or something like that. Then you're going to have like your model that you're actually trying to take into production. Putting it behind a feature gate is the easiest way to be like, okay, I have control over this thing. You can do things like say, hey, I only want employees to have access to this feature. So here I'm like, these are the user IDs of my employees. These are my employees. And I want it to just go out to just those people. So it's a pretty easy way to like control those initial rollouts. And then when you're ready for more people to have access to it, you can use like our everyone criteria. We have a few different criteria. You can say things like, oh, I want, if it's more than this time, or I only want users in the US, things like that. We offer you a lot of control, but we just have this big everyone one. And you can do something like say, hey, I want to give 50% of people access to this new feature, new model backed feature, as the case may be. And like I said earlier, when you have these like partial rollouts, again, this one is not a partial rollout. It's got 0% in one group, 100% in the other group. This one is a partial rollout. When you have these partial rollouts, we'll actually treat it as an A/B test. We've put the people into this bucket and this bucket. The only difference really should be that they got this experience. So you can actually like you can derive some actual causal relationships instead of just being like, we noticed that when we rolled this model out, we saw things were better. Like that's not a very satisfying way to actually compute results. You know, it's not a good way to like justify your impact. It's much better if you can actually say, we gave this feature to X% of people, and for those X%, they were this much better than the people who didn't have our feature. That's like a real causal relationship. And so we'll compute for those two groups what the actual impact was. So it's able to be things that are not just those like test data. You can go a lot deeper. You can say like, oh yes, we actually improved revenue. We considered that like for our model, we were just training to like make people click on items more, but you can actually be like, yes, clicking on items more gave us more revenue. Or in this case, like, hey, it let people add things to their cart more. And you're able to configure what we call monitoring metrics. So that's like, hey, which ones are like you can think of it like your hypothesis or like your guardrails. So guardrails might be things like, oh, page load time, because like, you know, maybe now it takes that extra longer because you're having to run things through this model. It's really good to be able to capture that impact in terms of a potential downside, in addition to those like actual wins that you're hoping to see. So you're able to see those monitoring metrics front and center, but you can also see, hey, I want to know for all my metrics, how did things move, and like find the wins and losses there. You can also do some pretty cool slicing and dicing, like I mentioned before. Captions, notice that for non-English speakers, it was actually a lot better. We let you do that sort of stuff here. So I can say like, yeah, like locale is something I cared about. Let me actually group by locale and see how all those metrics changed. Yeah, so it's pretty powerful in terms of being able to measure the impact of these like sort of harder to wrap your head around features in terms of like justifying this to other people at your company even. It's really big to be able to say, yes, here is the impact that I had on our product. The other cool thing you can do, like I said, is you can actually export those exposures. You can export pretty much everything. We feel pretty strongly that your data is like your data. We're not trying to hold on to it. We're just doing a lot of math for you. So yeah, if you want to export which people were in each group, you can do that here. And that's how you can do that like interesting training on only not people getting the product, to prevent that like model drift. Or if you have like more in-depth analyses you want to do that for whatever reason we don't support currently, you can definitely just export, hey, give me everything. These will potentially be pretty big depending on your user count, but yeah. So I'm gonna hop back into the slides. Oh, sorry, one more thing. You can also set up similarly. You can say, hey, I want you to just like forward those real time. You can say, just give me exposures if you don't want to like just download it in these batches. Cool. I'm gonna flip back to my slides here. Yeah. So ML is like a really cool and powerful tool, but it's one that I think a lot of people are like rightfully a little apprehensive of just adding to their products. It's a little hard to justify to other people if you're like not running these experiments, like to be like, oh yes, why was your model better? Or why was, you know, again, going back to that captions example, why was it better to be using Google text to speech, or speech to text rather, versus like Whisper from OpenAI? Those sorts of things are really hard questions to answer. You can look at your training data and you can be like, oh yeah, my new model was like 5% better at predicting what if someone would click on this item. But that alone isn't quite enough to really feel like super confident that you're making the actual product better. I don't know, you can think of things like, how do you know if you're like just causing people to click on spammy things, things like that, versus like actually finding value. The other note there is just like, how do you measuring your impact is really, really important, really powerful. especially because these are like expensive things often, that are like, you need a way to justify. And this is sort of that, like I said, it mitigates all those risks, measures the wins. And yeah, if you're not measuring wins, you're not really having impact, is sort of my opinion there. So I think that's about all I had for prepared content. So I think we're going to open the floor to any question and answers that people might have had in the chat.
Yeah, thanks, Ty. We had a question come in from Raphael. It's kind of a long one, so I just want to make sure I get all of it. Would it be possible to assign pieces of content to group A versus group B and have all users interact with them? We would love to run some experiments with ML, but for some app flows, we are not allowed to show different pieces of content to different users. The experiment has to be at the content level, not at the user level. And I'll also pop this in the chat so everyone else can see it as well.
Awesome. Yeah, this is a really cool question. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm going to hop back into console, so just bear with me as I preview. Bear with me as I hop back into console here. Yeah, I think this is a really cool question. One thing that you'll see a lot is like caring about what your unit of randomization is. Let me hop into my project settings, I believe. Actually, here, I'll just make a new gate. When you make a gate, you actually select what your ID type is, or an experiment, you select what your ID type is. Out of the box, we give you 2 ID types. We give you this user ID, which might be how you're thinking about who your users are in your product. We also give you this like stable ID, which you can think of as like a device ID. So if you're running something on some client SDK, yeah, your users on each device will have their own stable ID, but then they might have one user ID that you're passing to us. But you can actually add your own ID types also. So for us, for instance, we have this concept of like a company ID, so that we can run experiments at the company level rather than at the user level. So we can make sure those experiences are consistent for everyone at your company. You're not looking over to one of your coworkers and being like, oh yeah, why are you seeing this experience that I'm not? We've seen people do things like, Lime's an example. They have bikes as well as users, so they can actually have like, we can run experiments on bikes versus running experiments on users. So you can definitely just like have different ID types for different things like that. And like your user object can even have multiple ID types associated with it, and then it's just which experiment type is happening will determine what experience they're seeing. So again, going back to that, to us, you are a user for us. You have a stable ID when you're on a device. You have a project that you're in, and you might even have like a big collection of projects that you're in. We can experiment at all those levels. You can definitely make a custom ID type for your content and then run experiments at the content level. And users are totally agnostic of that. Cool.
Awesome. Thanks, Ty. Another question that came in, when does the Statsig SDK bucket an individual?
Yeah. One thing that's pretty neat about us is that it's actually like totally deterministic. You have a, like, if you're familiar with like salts and hashes, we hash your user with some salt for the gate. And that's how we actually like determine which bucket you will go in. So it's a little funny that we can know ahead of time what bucket you'll be in. But in terms of when you actually get like added to one of these groups, that is at time of, we call it exposure. For a gate, that is when you call check gate on this user. For an experiment, it's when you call get experiment on a user. If your experiment's in a layer, it's when you get one of the parameters in the layer. If anyone is using layers out there. But yeah, so you get bucketed when you actually use the SDK to call, like to actually check what group you're in. But your bucket was determined ahead of time. Although we do things like, as you like, if you make significant changes to your gate or experiment, we will resalt it. So for an experiment, if you restart it, we'll resalt it and your users will get reshuffled. But yeah.
Cool. Okay. A couple more here. I think that we actually have time for. When does it make sense to exclude our tests from each other? How do you deal with small sample sizes?
Cool. I'll hit the second part of that first, actually. I know I'll try to find the blog post and we can send it out after. I know Tim, who leaves that data cancel with you now. Tim has a really good blog post about small sample sizes. And his rough takeaway there is that when you're doing something like trying to measure impact, it's really tempting to say that you need like, oh, like how am I going to experiment if I don't have like Facebook level users, you know? The rub, I guess, is that the wins you're looking for are pretty different at those scales. When Facebook is like looking for a win, they're looking for like, oh yeah, we saw a 0.1% increase in users taking this action, and that's like huge, right? To find those levels of wins, you do need that many users. But if you have a smaller user base, you're probably less optimized already. So maybe you're looking for more like a 20% win. If you're looking for that, if your win is like whatever 200 times the size of the win that Facebook was looking for, you need way less users. So yeah, like there's definitely trade-offs. We help you navigate those trade-offs. We have a tool called the Power Analysis Calculator that'll tell you what sorts of wins or losses you can actually expect to measure. So for a given metric, sure, let's go to how much people were purchasing. You can actually pull up the Power Analysis Calculator and say, like, you can calculate the quote unquote MDE. This is the minimum detectable effect. You can roughly think of it like, if my hypothesis, if I'm going to use this many users, like how big does my hypothesis have to be for it to make sense? You can do that the other direction too. So like, if I want to see a 10% win in purchases on my big company, you're like, oh, cool, I only need to use 10% of the users. Whereas like, as you go smaller, you'll need to use more and more users to actually be able to detect it reliably. And then on the first point there, I think it was, how should I think about excluding tests from each other? Am I right on that?
Yeah, when does it make sense to exclude our tests from each other? Correct.
Cool. Yeah, Tim has another, not to always reference Tim's blog posts, but he has a lot of good ones. He has another blog post about this. In general, we think people tend to overstate how much like interaction effects matter. There's some cases where like it definitely will matter. If you have some button on your page and you're changing the color of the button in one experiment and you're changing the color of the text in another experiment, those are pretty bad to like have overlapping with each other when you're like modifying the same unit like that. You could lead to some pretty bad user experiences. But even like changing one element on this page here and one element on this page here, that's like something we generally think you can get away with, like not worrying about having mutually exclusive. But our way to maintain that is you can create a layer. In a layer, you again choose an ID type, calling back to that sort of what are my things I'm experimenting on. In a layer, the experiments in it will be totally mutually exclusive of each other. You'll just say like this group of users have access to it versus like another group. So yeah, if you have two groups or two experiments in there, I'll just make two real quick. If I say like, yeah, this one's going to use like 50% of my users, and we go back to that layer, you'll see that like, hey, only 50% of it is now available because I allocated them to this. That's how you can maintain mutual exclusion. The trade-off there is you'll have less power because you have less users.
Got it. Okay, I think we actually only have time for one last question, and it just came in. Does Statsig bucket an individual when retrieving a layer?
Yeah, good question. Tricky one. The user is not bucketed when you just call get layer. Do I have the code samples here? No, I don't. That's all right. When you call get layer, it like loads the layer into your and into like whatever variables you're putting in. That is not when it gets bucketed. You are actually considered exposed when you call .get and then the name of the parameter that you're getting out of that layer. So we think of experiments and in terms of parameters rather than saying, hey, a user is in group A or group B. We tend to think, oh, like the button color is blue and the button text is welcome to my experiment. It's just like a slightly different way of thinking that we think makes your code a bit cleaner. Instead of like totally forking, you get to do it a lot later. But yeah, when you actually retrieve one of the values of these parameters is when you'd be considered exposed to the group. But again, everything is like predetermined. So we already know which experiment you might be eligible for. But yeah, this is when you'd be considered part of it.
Awesome. All right. Well, we are out of time. I just popped in the link to join our Slack community. So if you have any other questions, like we can continue the conversation there. You can message Tyler directly. We also have more of our enterprise engineers there if you guys have any questions whatsoever. Next month, we're going to be doing a virtual meetup on artificial intelligence. So we'll get some details over to you shortly about that. But thank you all so much for joining us. We really appreciate you guys taking the time, and we hope you join us again soon. Have a good one.